Hello everyone, it's time for another live look at the astrology. My name is Katie Sweetman, and this is your look at the astrology for March 23rd through 29th of 2026. So welcome to Aries season. We are now in the astrological new year. The sun went into Aries. I realized that was last week, March 20th, but here we are. We are fully now into Aries season. And as we start this new year, it's a very interesting astrological new year because one of the things that makes 2026 unique is that we have a lot of the outer planets, I would say not a lot, all of them, in new signs. And one of those planets is Saturn. And maybe if you've been around these parts, you know how much I love Saturn. And one of the reasons I love Saturn is because it makes my work a little bit more easier as an astrologer, because when I'm sitting down with a client, Saturn tells me where's the focus right now. Also, Saturn in your own chart when you were born, where's the focus of your life? Of course, it's a little bit more complex than that, but Saturn always tells me what is your priority. Saturn changed signs February 13th, about 5 weeks ago, and so our priority shifted in 2026. And Saturn will be in Aries for 2 more years until April of 2028. But that's not the only planet in Aries right now. We also have Neptune in Aries. It's a little bit more of a bigger conversation. I will touch a little bit on Neptune. And it's a little bit hard, honestly, to get a line on Neptune because Neptune works on a very different plane of energy than Saturn. Saturn's the physical. Saturn's what we can touch. It's time, it's aging, it's cause and effect or karma. But Neptune works in the intermediary. It sort of works on the same plane as the moon. It pulls back the veil. It sensitizes. It can act as an antenna. And so it's acting as a sensitizer and an antenna for Aries. But Neptune's going to be in Aries for 14 years. So it's a much longer period of time. That's why I said it's a much bigger conversation. But before I jump in too much, just want to reintroduce myself. My name is Katie Sweetman, and I'm an astrologer and psychic medium located here in the rolling hills of Central Maryland. It's very windy today, and every week we gather live to look at the astrology. You hear me say it every week. The astrology is 50%. You are the other 50%. And so if astrology acts as a framework, what do we put into that framework? If this is the astrological new year, what are we bringing into this astrological new year? There's a lot of things that are outside of our control. I'm just sort of stating that as fact, but we can still set our intentions. We can still plot a course. And this is something that we did in my workshop this weekend. I was talking about it last week and even the week before, that I was doing a workshop for the equinox called Sacred Fire, where we did series of meditations and sharing, and really, let's say this was the getting into the Neptune side of things. I have Neptune rising. So, for me, it's not just to give you information, it's to give you the tools in order to begin to connect to your higher wisdom and guidance. And so we went into the astrology chart. We all have an astrology chart. We went into the astrology chart like it's a space. It's a space that we can enter. That space has 12 rooms. This is something that I use in my work. I call it 12 rooms astrology, and how each room is a space that you fill, that you learn from. It reveals things to you. So this was something that we did over the weekend. And but now the sun is in Aries, and now that the sun is in Aries, we are sort of dialing a little bit more into Neptune. The Sun-Neptune conjunction was actually yesterday. I almost said September. It was yesterday of March 22nd, and this week, and this is actually a very important aspect, we have what's called the Sun-Saturn conjunction on March 25th. So even though Saturn has been in Aries since February 13th, we're still in the beginning of a story. The seeds are getting planted. Saturn is still revealing itself to us and showing us what our new priorities are. And maybe we're very well aware of what has changed over the last 5 weeks since Saturn went to Aries, but not not everybody. We need to listen for Saturn. We need to look for the clues. And, when we go through each of the 12 zodiac signs, I'll refresh us where Saturn is in your astrology and how that area is your priority. So maybe you have already seen in the last 5 weeks, or maybe you even saw a hint in 2025, because Saturn was in Aries, just as a preview, May 24th until September 1st of 2025. But maybe you're starting to get a line on what Saturn in Aries means for you. If you are an Aries rising, this is a very powerful new chapter for you. It marks the start of a new cycle. Even if you're not an Aries, you have Aries somewhere in your astrology. By the way, happy birthday, Aries. And let's talk a little bit about Aries, the first sign of the zodiac. In total, there are 12 signs in the zodiac. Each acts as a key and a step. It's my belief that the zodiac isn't just a collection of 12 signs. It actually acts in a way like a ladder or a map, in a way to learn about our life and our world, and how to put things in order, and how to grow and evolve, because the wheel can move forward, the wheel can move backwards. We're not always seemingly moving forwards, and sometimes we need to retrace our steps, and sometimes we need to fix things, and maybe that's the deeper purpose of retrogrades. For example, I know that last week we finished up Mercury retrograde. Mercury is still in Pisces, but not to digress too much, but we are in Aries season. So Aries represents the beginning. It is the first breath of life, the first rush of life. It sets us on a new cycle and course. And so Aries brings us forward. And I realize we are an international audience, and there's I can speak English. Western astrology is very much tied to the seasons. In fact, Western astrology, the beginning of Aries is the spring equinox in the Northern Hemisphere. And so at least here for me, I'm really seeing the beginnings of this new season. It's new life. There's greenery. There's buds in the trees. There's daffodils, and it all happens so quickly. It's like I would have sworn 5 weeks ago it was below zero Celsius, or below 32 freezing Fahrenheit, but now it's spring. It's pretty blustery at the moment, but it's a time of new beginnings. It's a time to set our course, and this is a course that we will walk as we go through each of the 12 zodiac signs over the astrological year. This will take us all the way to March of 2027. So how are you feeling, Aries? Do you feel that crossover into a new season? Do you feel Mars? Because Aries is ruled by Mars, and so Mars is courage and bravery, it's action, it's forward movement, and there's a real physicality to Aries, and by extension Mars. Aries is not an idea. I would say that's more Pisces. Pisces is the dream, it's the vision, if we even go back to Aquarius, it's the hope for the future. But Aries says, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to take action? And so if you are an Aries, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But again, even if you aren't Aries, you have a Mars. There's a Mars somewhere in your astrology. So this Aries season is pulling us forward with the energies of Mars. But what's interesting about this Aries season is that Mars is in Pisces. It'll be in Pisces for about the half of Aries season, maybe 3/4 of Aries season, because on April 9th, then Mars will get into Aries. But for right now, the energy of the season is pointing back towards Pisces, the last sign of the zodiac. And it's almost like, oh, Pisces, our old friend Pisces, because I was saying this, I think, last week. Pisces is a sign that we have a lot of experience with at this point. We had Saturn in Pisces 2023, 2024, 2025. The North Node is in Pisces right now. Neptune is in Pisces for 14 years. So in a way, going back to this idea that there are new cycles, but maybe we need to go back and wrap something up from an old cycle. The energy of Aries season needs the support of Pisces, We can't just rush into things. We need to make sure that it feels right for us, that we are listening to our intuition. What else? We also need to feel that we are really being empathetic and compassionate about how we're taking actions, because Pisces is a water sign. It talks about how we feel, but not just how we feel on a personal level. It's feeling into sort of the larger emotional body of humanity and creation. And there's a deep spirituality to Pisces. That's not to say that every Pisces really experiences it that way. So we have a little bit of some unfinished business courtesy of Mars and Pisces, but at the same time we need to make sure that there is a little bit of a meld between Pisces and Aries. Aries the beginning, Pisces the ending. There is a great sense of like that loop of energy, that loop of life, that loop of experience, because the zodiac is the wheel of life. And to get to Pisces is to reach a sign that symbolically represents the search for unity. It doesn't mean we find it when we get to Pisces, but the search for unity within, the search for unity around us, this ability to really find peace within. So that's a very different quality than sort of the raw energies of Aries, which is just do, go, move forward. But this season, we do need Pisces alongside of us. And that energy will shift on the 9th. And I'm sort of circling that as an astrologer, because Mars plus Aries is a lot of energy. It's no longer an idea. Let's do, let's go. It really gives forward movement. And so we may find that there's a bit of a different vibe as we get April 9th and later. But what I really want to talk about is Saturn, because and especially this week, with the sun in the early degrees of Aries, we are now beginning to meet Saturn in Aries. So Saturn spends about 2 to 3 years in each of the zodiac signs. So just for reference points, Saturn was in Pisces from March of 2023 until March of 2026, minus the summer, well, June and July of August of 2025. So we have about 2 to 3 years where Saturn is saying to us, this is your priority. Collectively, because astrology is both a collective experience, collective time, but it's also a personal experience, astrology is saying this area is your priority. Now, what does it mean to have Saturn in Aries? And maybe some of you even were born with Saturn in Aries, whether it's what's called your first Saturn return or your second Saturn return. The first Saturn return is 28, 29, and 30. The second Saturn return is 58, 59, 60. If you are those ages, we need to talk, because the Saturn return is one of the most important times of your life, especially the first Saturn return. But Saturn in Aries, traditionally speaking, Saturn is not at home in Aries. And it reminds us that, I'm hopefully not going to be too technical, but Saturn is what's called exalted in Libra. Saturn does its best work in Libra, the sign of relationships and connections, the scales, balance, fairness, equity. And so Saturn in Aries means that Saturn is actually in the sign of what it's called its fall. It reminds us that Saturn cannot do its best work in Aries. That doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, Saturn's in Aries. No, it means that we need to sort of listen for this time and how we are living this time. Because Saturn in Aries, there's sort of two sides to it. For some people, Saturn in Aries is a very strong reminder that you need to prioritize yourself. I know that that sounds a little bit selfish, but for some of us, maybe we're too in, going back to this idea of Saturn exalted in Libra and the scales, where things are unbalanced. We're putting a lot of energy and focus to our detriment on other people. It could be an inequity in a relationship. It could be inequity in some other part of your life. And so Saturn is saying, take yourself seriously. Similarly, for some people, Saturn is saying it's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. You can't always rely on other people. We all go, for example, through different periods of our life where we realize it's me, it's on me. maybe a parent is sick, or maybe you are looking to make a big transition in your life, or maybe you're leaving a relationship after being in a relationship for a long time. These are just examples, of course. And you're like, it's on me. I have to really find my responsibility, my maturity, my authority. But for some people, we have to look at the other side of Saturn and Aries, where we are too self-reliant, where we do not reach out and ask for help. I was talking to a friend this weekend who was telling me about a story about somebody she knows who had a bad accident. And my friend was trying to help her, and it was, to make a very long story short, there was a lot of pushing back the help. And this is somebody that was really needing a lot of care and attention. And she was like, I don't need anybody. I've taken care of myself my whole life. And I'm thinking, wow, that is Saturn and Aries in its detriment, because as human beings, and I'm saying this as a New Yorker, where you're really you learn to be hyper self-reliant. But if you get sick, or if something happens, and I remember this during the pandemic, by myself in my apartment in Brooklyn, and I'm like, okay, this is maybe not the best long-term strategy. So Saturn is reminding some of us with Saturn and Aries that we can't do life alone. We need to make sure that we can have people to rely on, that we have relationships. So you need to sort of listen. These are just some examples to listen for what does Saturn and Aries mean for you? I realize we are just 5 weeks into Saturn and Aries, so maybe it's a little bit new, but it is a time where we need to listen for Saturn, because Saturn's beginning to really set up a framework that we will navigate for the next 2 years. And to some degree, because Saturn works in 30-year cycles, Saturn has not been in Aries since 96, 97, 98 until April of 1999, that this is really planting the seeds for something greater. So again, Saturn went to Aries in February of 2026, so just 5 weeks ago. So that's a point that we all need to sort of observe and look at. And then Saturn makes this conjunction, goes into Aries on March 20th, makes this conjunction on March 25th. And now we need to listen, because this is our real first connection with Saturn and Aries. Saturn in general is, you honor time, you honor your commitments, you build, you construct, you build towards the future, you show up, you really have a positive relationship with authority. Of course, it could be the opposite, a negative relationship with authority, or you're not showing up, or you're not following through. And this is a week for us to really show up for Saturn, because we're trying to show Saturn that we can handle the responsibility, that yes, we know who to call to help us, that's sort of reaching out towards Saturn and Libra, metaphorically speaking, but that we can really take that step up into a different stage of our personal growth and maturity. Saturn, we don't always think of Saturn as a planet of growth, but it is a planet of growth. It is the growth of our maturity. It's the growth of our life. Jupiter is also growth, but it's the growth of our spirit, for example. But Saturn is really much about our physical world, our physical life, time, karma, aging, and while we are here in a physical body, we are under the laws of Saturn. Again, time, karma, and aging. If you want to use Saturn this week and really put your life in order, or put something very specific in order, or set a boundary with somebody, set a boundary in a relationship, or even make a commitment to somebody, or cut a connection, I mean that in a healthy, positive way. Maybe it's an attachment, maybe it's a substance. Saturn's your planet, because Saturn really says the things that we really choose under Saturn's influence are really, they mark our time. And they really can set us up for the long term, because Saturn doesn't think in terms of days or weeks or months. Saturn thinks in terms of years, if not decades. So lots of Saturn energy this week. And I just sort of want to quickly put that nod towards Neptune and Aries. We had Neptune and Aries this weekend. So maybe for me, and of course I'm not the standard, but maybe for me, being more in that sort of mystical, energetic side of things, working with people, leading them through energy, maybe that's what Saturn and Aries means for me, or at least it's a little bit of a clue of what this time will mean. And maybe in your own time, you can reflect on what was going on this weekend, what's even going on now, how do I feel emotionally, do I feel grounded, for example, because also Neptune can be illusions. It can show us, pull back the veil, but also sometimes with Neptune, we think we're seeing what we're seeing, but in reality, we're not seeing reality. So Neptune's a much longer influence, but I want to sort of focus more on Saturn because Saturn's a little bit easier to connect to and to make sense of. Saturn is time and how time unfolds in our lives, but Neptune is what's called an evolutionary planet. Its job is to get us to grow and evolve, and sometimes by any means possible. Neptune is trying to get us to open up our emotions, our psyche, to open up to the world beyond this world, hopefully in healthy ways. And that's a very different energy than Saturn. So, big checkpoint this week was Saturn, March 25th. Saturn and the Sun will come together at 4 degrees of Aries. And so, again, we just sort of want to listen for Saturn, and then we're going to get into April. Mars is going to go into Aries April 9th. We're going to have the Mars-Saturn conjunction on April 19th. This is 2 days after the Aries new moon, and as we go into the end of April and into the beginning of May, we're going to get even more of an idea of what Saturn in Aries means for us. And so again, there is the collective experience with Saturn Aries, but then Saturn means something very specific for our own astrology. It could be a Saturn return. We are in our late 20s. We are in our late 50s. It could be the Saturn opposition. We are in our mid 40s. It could also mean that this is a period of your life of settling down or major transitions. It really depends on your own personal astrology. It's just your friendly reminder, since I know some of you are my clients. We can always sit down one-on-one and see where Saturn is in your astrology and what sort of new cycles are coming into your life. So you can go to my website, empoweringastrology.com, and so let's go through each of the 12 zodiac signs so we can listen for Saturn a little bit more and see what's beginning to come into focus where Aries is in your astrology. So we will start with Aries. So Aries, so Mars is your planet, as you know, and Mars has been in Pisces since the beginning of March. And I was having this conversation with the Aries rising client because we can't lose sight of the fact that Mars is in a place right now where a lot of deep emotions are coming up. It's not about being in the physical world. It's really beginning to connect to the spiritual or to release and let go. And it can be like a little bit of a funky time for Aries rising. I realize some of you are Aries, it's your birthday. We need to get into April 9th, but to use this time before April 9th to be very conscientious about what you do not want to bring with you into this new cycle. This was something that I said to you when Saturn was in Pisces. It's like you want to be very conscientious about what you don't want to bring with you when Saturn goes into Aries on February 13th. And in a way, Mars is giving you another opportunity to really detach, release, and to let go. But that said, we just had that Pisces new moon. It's really about endings. I put endings in air quotes because endings means different things to different people. It's about release. It's about your spirituality, but it's also that inner search for wisdom and knowledge, for peace, and for letting go. Aries season, of course, either it is your birthday, happy birthday, or your Aries rising. It's the start of a new cycle. And so let's now talk about Saturn. So Saturn has been in your first sign since February 13th, and it will be there until April of 2028. Now that is a very long time. And so what is Saturn is saying to you? It's time for you to take things seriously. It's time for you to put things in order. It's time to stand on your own 2 feet, to have a stronger sense of personal self-reliance, or don't forget about other people, to make connections, to build relationships, because even if you have to take on more responsibility at this time in your life, don't forget about other people. regardless of whether you are an Aries sun or an Aries rising, it is a significant time in your life that is really beginning to mark a shift of the narrative in some way. It's for you, Aries, to listen for what that shift of narrative is, particularly after April 9th, because that's when Mars gets into Aries, and especially after April 17th, 19th, after the new moon, after Mars conjunct Saturn, because it's going to start to really put into focus and into your sort of your front of priorities what this new time is about in your life. Taurus. So Venus is your planet. Venus right now is coming to the end of, just coming to the end of Aries. And I think it's going to get to Taurus on March 30th. So that is just next week and beginning of next week. And so the energy of your sign actually is in something called your 12th. So for you, Taurus, symbolically speaking, you are until the 30th of March, you are coming to the end of a cycle. This is a yearly cycle because Venus takes a year to go throughout the zodiac. And between now and the end of the month, it is time to release, to reflect, to search yourself, to go within, and to find that inner wisdom and knowledge that you will then bring with you into the next personal year, your birthday, or even if you're Taurus rising, the start of your personal calendar. Venus has been in the same place as Saturn, and so this is a good time. I mean, we talked about this, I think it was earlier this month, we had the Venus-Saturn conjunction, but Saturn is now in your 12th, and so for all Taurus risings, your priority until April 2028 is your inner spiritual life. That means different things to different Tauruses, but at the end of the day, we are all people, we are all spirits in a body. I don't know, maybe you don't believe that, but Saturn is saying to you, like, this is where the work is. And so the question for you to start to figure out is, what does that mean for you and how do you take action? Does working on your inner life, your spirituality, letting go, making peace, does that mean you take a course? Do you read a book? Do you go and retreat? Do you search yourself? Do you put in the time? This sort of give you a visual that I've been giving my Taurus rising clients. It's like it is as if you are going through the boxes of the last 30 years of your life. I don't know how old you are. Maybe you're not 30 yet, but this could also be a metaphor for what you are even carrying from other lifetimes, if you believe in that. So Saturn is saying, it's time to go through these boxes. It's time to see what's in these boxes, and then to be very conscientious about what you are leaving behind and what you are bringing forward. So, in short, Taurus, it's time to work on your baggage. Taurus, typically, because it's a material sign, it has a lot of stuff, but the stuff sometimes is representative of something that you can't even see. It's emotional, it's psychic, it's spiritual. So that's where your work is right now, and especially when Mars gets into this place at the end, April 9th, you're going to feel as you go into April that you're like 1 foot in something new, but 1 foot in something that's really beginning to come to an end. Gemini, so Mercury is your planet, and Mercury is currently in Pisces. Pisces is something called your 10th sign. So as you know, we had Mercury retrograde. This was, I think, the 23rd of February, thereabouts, up until last Friday. What was last Friday? Mercury went direct on the 20th. So this is your time that happens every 3 months for you to go back, to rewind, to see things from a different point of view, to retrace your steps. And so Mercury is going to be there until April 14th. So there's a lot of focus and energy on your 10th. It could be career, it could be your public life, it could be the duties and responsibilities that we all carry, it could be your worldly duties and responsibilities. But whatever is happening, in a way, it connects to a much larger chapter of your life. This is one that really carved out its time, 2023 to 2026, when Saturn was in this space. So whatever is happening, it's asking more of you. It's asking you to step up into a greater role of authority. And then Mars is here. So just a lot of things that are happening in your public life, your public reputation, your professional life. But let's talk about Saturn, because Saturn is now in something called your 11th, and it's going to be in your 11th until April of 2028. So if Saturn is our priorities, let's say Mars is our short-term priorities, but Saturn is our long-term priorities, and your priority is community. It could be friends, your social network. It could be community, just the community that you're a part of, like the town that you live in. It could be community on a broader level, or even social issues, social causes, humanity, society. It could also be looking towards the future. What I've noticed is that when Saturn goes into the 11th, this is not going to be for everybody, but when Saturn goes into the 11th, it's like you have to start to really look at who are your friends and who are not your friends, who are your allies and who are not your allies. I know that sounds a little bit black and white, but Saturn is a very black and white planet. These people are either for you. I don't mean like they're either for you or not for you. I mean, they're either for your life, they support your life, they actually bring something to your life, or they don't. And sometimes friendships will end while Saturn's in the 11th. Sometimes it's a need to really redefine a friendship, to really put into the work and to build stronger friendships when Saturn is in the 11th. And sometimes it's a little bit more on a larger frame. You start getting involved in your community, larger issues, social causes, humanitarian themes. But that's where the priority is of the chart. And maybe you're starting to see that come into your life. Maybe you don't, but listen for Saturn this week, because it's really talking about this bigger arc that will take you into 2028. Cancer. So the moon is your planet, and the moon, it's right now, it's in Gemini. It's going to be in Gemini for the next couple of days. And I don't know about you. Maybe because I'm Gemini moon and the sun's in Aries right now. And I was just like, there's just like this movement of energy, which honestly, I like it. But we have Gemini moon the first couple of days. So there is movement. There's a lot of information, phone calls, messages, and it's kind of a busy energy for the next couple of days. But Gemini for you is something called your 12th sign. It's the sign that comes before you. So it represents a need to go within, a need to reflect, a need to listen. And I say listen because Gemini in this case is about listening to your intuition. It's about meditating, maybe something coming through a dream, a message. Again, listening more to your intuition. But then when the moon goes into Cancer midweek, then it's the start of a personal cycle that will take you over a month. So that said, let's talk about Saturn. So for my Cancer risings, Saturn's time in Aries is actually a major transit. A transit just means that Saturn is moving or transiting a sign or a part of your astrology. So for you, Aries is something called your 10th sign. It's your career, your public life, your public reputation. It's the most public part of your astrology versus, let's say, Gemini, which is one of the most private and hidden parts of your astrology. So Saturn is saying to you, it's going to be different for different Cancer risings. It's time for you to take your career seriously. Maybe this is a time where suddenly you need to get clear, like, what do I want to be when I grow up? Kind of clear about your career, or clear in the sense of what role are you playing? And maybe you're doing that, but you need to do it a little bit more concretely, because Saturn is always about the energy of making things real and concrete. As you redefine your role in the world, sometimes that includes becoming a parent for the first time, because Saturn can also talk about major personal milestones and getting that title of parent, mom, dad, for example. Saturn going through this part of your astrology can also, just on a sort of a larger level, talk about the need for greater responsibilities and duties in the world. Like the bar is being set higher for you, Cancer. And so there is a bit of pressure in general on your sign to really step into a higher role of authority. So for some, I know sometimes when I talk about career transits, people are like, well, I'm a stay-at-home mom, or I'm retired, or how is this relevant for me? Even if you don't have a 9 to 5 or something that you would call a career, you still play a role in the world. And so Saturn is saying either what is it, or you need to take it more seriously. And that's really where the focus and priority is for the next 2 years. Leo. Leo, so the sun is your planet, and as you know, the sun just went into Aries, so you got that sort of double dose of fire energy. Leo is a fire sign, Aries is a fire sign. And I know I said this last week, and I think I even had a conversation with a Leo client. The second half of the year for Leo is very different than the first, because the second half of the year really amps up that fire energy, fire and air. And we know that fire and air, they need each other as fuel. So even though it's not the second half of the year, the sun in Aries is beginning to open up a space that I feel is going to be a much bigger focus in the second half of the year. Why the second half of the year? Because Jupiter will go into Leo. It's at the end of June. I think it's like June 30th, if I remember correctly, of 2026. So Jupiter will be in your sign. We'll have a Leo eclipse in August. So something is beginning to set up for you, Leo. And Aries season is a time for you to sort of, on a more of a broader plane, for you to figure out, what do you believe in? What do you stand for? What do you think is true? It's a time to really rally. This is a space that really gets into the energy of Sagittarius, even though Sagittarius is not this part of your astrology, but Sagittarius is the torch. This is where Leo can be an advocate, to hold the torch for something that it believes in, to show the way. And maybe this is a time where you're really thinking more philosophically about, again, what do you believe in? What do you stand for? What are your convictions? What's your truth? On a more of a surface level, maybe you're traveling, maybe you're going on long distance trips, or maybe you're going back to school, or maybe you're publishing something. But this is really about wisdom and knowledge, and typically it is the wisdom and knowledge that is forged out of your time in the 8th. And so, as you know, Leo, you had Saturn in the 8th, 2023 all the way to 2026. And so after everything that you went through the past 3 years, Leo, what do you believe in? What do you stand for? I know I've said that a few times already, but now that the sun is in Aries here with Saturn, it's about really putting that out there in a way that makes sense for your life, or to make it more real and concrete, because our convictions are our convictions. It doesn't mean that we can't change and evolve how we think about it, or how we believe about something, but we all need to have a sense of right and wrong, a sense of conviction. And so Saturn is saying to you, you really need to be in your principles, or stand up for your principles this week. But whatever is happening, it's connected to a larger story, and maybe something that's really opening up more in the second half of the year. Virgo. So Mercury is your planet, and Mercury, as you know, it just finished up its retrograde last week, and Mercury is in Pisces. So we've got this 2-month period, of which you've got Mercury in Pisces until April 14th. But in general, this 2-month period where you're really focusing on relationships. So this is a broader focus. It doesn't have to necessarily mean like a relationship, but for some of you, that's where a lot of the energy and focus is at the moment. It's about the people in your life and how you connect and relate and socialize with them. And I said this to you last week, and very likely even the week before. Mercury was retracing a path that Saturn was in 2023, 2024, 2025, and it's the beginning of 2026. So you had a much larger period of your life where you really needed to build relationships, redefine relationships, recommit to relationships, start a relationship, end a relationship, or just really work on those larger people skills, for example. So Mercury will leave the space, although it would be April 19th, but we are now in, not April 19th, April 14th, but we are now in Aries season. Aries is something called your 8th sign. In our astrology, each sign acts as a domain, like a part of our life. There could be relationships, the seventh, there could be home and family, which is your fourth. But the eighth is more emotional, psychological. It can be about money and finance, but just to start with the emotional and psychological component of it, it is a space where we have to face ourselves. Because as human beings, we do not grow and evolve if every day is the same, if we never look within, if we never question ourselves. So the eighth, whether it's a day, a month, or Saturn in the eighth, in this case until April of 2028, it's really saying to you, Virgo, your priority is your emotional health and wellness, your psyche. Sometimes we're really good at compartmentalizing. Sometimes we're really good at taking everything that's ever happened to us and still grieves us, and we put it into a box. And that's the equivalency of pushing everything into the eighth. And we say, I will deal with this later. I'm too busy taking care of everything. I'm a Virgo. But Saturn in the eighth is saying, no, Virgo, now is time. So the question for you to reflect on, Virgo, is what have you noticed in the last 5 weeks? Have you noticed that there has been a bigger call to work on yourself, to go deeper? Saturn in the eighth, it can be a time when we start therapy or we start a work where we get into the material, the emotional and psychic material that we haven't had time to really go through. It gets into themes about vulnerability, trust, power, control, and even the things that get into the quote-unquote shadow material. What comes out of this time of Saturn in the eighth is a stripping down of the ego. And I'm saying this as a Scorpio. I know it's a little bit intense, but the ego is the ego. The ego is our sense of who we are. There's positive ego, which is self-esteem, positive self-esteem, but there's also negative ego, where we have an illusion about who we are, or we don't think we're good enough, or whatever it is. And so the time in the eighth is to strip that away so that you can reveal the truth of who you are. It's within you. And sometimes the most intimate and vulnerable thing that we can do is to reveal that, and even to reveal it to ourselves. So this can be a powerful time for you, Virgo. It's like, the question is, how do you live it, and what do you do? What do you choose during this time? For some Virgos, there is a financial component of this time. It is to really look at money and assets and debt, to look at estates, to plan an estate, to look at inheritances, and I mean that both metaphorically, the emotional inheritances that you've carried, or even literally that what you've inherited physically from other people, your family, money, a partnership. But also it can look at, again, the debts that we carry. So there can be this financial component and really needing to work and clean up finances. And it's for you to sort of really feel how this part of your life is beginning to come into focus. Libra. So Venus is your planet. And as you know, Venus has been in Aries, I think, since the end of, the 6th of March. So really not that long ago. And Venus will be in Aries until March 30th. So that's next week. And it's a time for you, Libra, to really focus on relationships. So Venus is your planet, so it's pulling the energy of your astrology, it's pulling your energy symbolically over to the part of the chart that talks about other people. Maybe you're in partnership, maybe you are single, maybe you are many years single. It doesn't matter. You're still a human being. Like, we don't live alone in the woods, or I don't know, maybe we do. You got great internet, but this is a time that's reminding us that we have to also take care of our relationships. We need to connect to new people. We need to connect to existing relationships. And so that's where the energy and focus of the chart is for the moment. But here's the thing, I said this to you earlier this month. Venus has been in the same sign as Saturn. And Saturn went into your 7th sign of relationships back on February 13th. It'll be there until, I think it's April 13th of 2028. So that's 2 years. Saturn is saying to Libra, your priority, your focus for the next 2 years is relationships. So that can mean a couple of different things. If you are not in a relationship, maybe you start a major relationship. You're in an existing relationship, even if it's something that's a little bit more casual, and Saturn is saying to you symbolically, What are you doing? What are we doing? Meaning, what are you and this other person doing? Because Saturn doesn't like things that are casual. Saturn doesn't like things that are not equal in balance. And Saturn is really trying to say to you, it's time to have stronger and more mature relationships in your life. For some people, it's to look at existing relationships. You are in a long marriage or a long partnership, and you come to a point where the relationship needs to be reconsidered. Is this working? Is this not working? And for some people, it's not necessarily about anything being wrong in the relationship, but it's time for a new milestone in the relationship. Maybe you and your partner, you move, and so there's a big move, and that sort of marks this new time in your life. And maybe for some couples, maybe there is a birth of a child that's also very Saturnian, for example, but that's not going to be the case for everybody. And maybe it's just simply about reminding Libra, even though it's a sign of relationship, that even though you're really good at managing everybody else, what about you? And also, to some degree, where's the balance? Because if you're really good at putting everybody else first, and Saturn is going through the 7th, it may talk about a need to put things in balance, put things in order. For example, for some of you Libra risings, it's also about your social skills. How do you connect? How do you relate? How do you socialize? How do you set boundaries? So you have to tease out how this is going to show up in your life and what this, of course, means for you. But it is a major time to be a Libra or Libra rising, and there will be personal, notable milestones over the next 2 years in your life, particularly around relationship. Not 100%, but particularly about relationship. Scorpio. So Mars is your planet, and since the beginning of the month, Mars has been in Pisces. Pisces is something called your 5th sign. So Mars pulls the energy of you, it pulls the energy of your astrology towards a sign that represents joy, fun, creativity, self-expression. And so Mars is saying to you, it's time to get back to the spark of life. There are many reasons why maybe that spark is not there. Maybe it's just been a long winter, or maybe you've just had a lot of duties and responsibilities, or maybe you sort of forgot about having fun and playing, or maybe you have something, that creative spark is a little bit needing some time and energy, for example. So this is a time for you to get back to you, the things that light you up, that give you joy, that give you passion. Now, Mars is in Pisces, and Pisces is a fellow water sign, so it also gets into this idea of creativity and that emotionality and that sort of mystical, magical energy that plays well with that Scorpio sun or that Scorpio rising. Just to put on your radar, Mars will go into Aries on April 9th. So I believe that's about 3 weeks from now, if I'm doing my math correctly. And so that's going to be a bigger shift. And I wanted to sort of put that on the horizon, because when Mars goes into Aries, it's going to it's going to be the same sign as Saturn. And so this is a good segue to talk about Saturn, particularly this week. We don't have to wait till April 9th, is that we have what's called the Sun-Saturn conjunction on March 25th. Saturn, for the next 2 years, is in something called your 6th sign. The 6th sign is the sign of work and health and projects and the day-to-day duties of your life. And so Saturn is saying, it depends on the Scorpio, it's time to take this area of your life seriously. It could be your health. You really need to make the checkups. You need to stop doing XY. You need to start doing more of XYZ. You need to take your vitamins. You need to eat your vegetables. You need to make a dietary change. You need to get more exercise. You need to change your habits or even the day-to-day structure of your life, because it's about having it flow better. And so it's for you, Scorpio, to really reflect back on what has the past 5 weeks been with Saturn and Aries. Have you sensed a shift in your health? Have you sensed a shift in your relationship with your health? You want to, again, make a long-lasting change. You want to do something positive. You want to get a checkup, because that is going to be your focus for the next 2 years. If it's not health and wellness, it could be work and projects. You want to start a project. You're really thinking about where you put your energy in. But as an aside, Scorpio has a reputation for being a workaholic. And when Mars goes into Scorpio on April 9th, you're like, oh, that's right. Because Mars, with the energy of Scorpio is also ruled by Mars. Scorpio is really good at getting things done and doing, and going. And maybe Saturn is saying to you, how do you put things in balance? Because if you're being a workaholic, that's not a good long-term strategy, for example. So I'm just sort of giving a lot of different examples of how this time may work out. Because if you have not been taking care of your body, if you have not been taking care of your life, 6th house, 6th sign, Saturn is going to start to show you what is needing your attention and what is out of balance. Sagittarius. So Jupiter is your planet. I think it was a couple of weeks ago Jupiter turned direct, so it doesn't mean that suddenly your life is direct. It's a different state of energy. The retrograde is a time to connect to the yin, the receptive, the intuitive. The direct is a time to connect to the yang, the active, the forward movement. So Jupiter is still in your 8th sign. Cancer is your 8th sign until the end of June. So we're beginning to get to the end of this time, and there's going to be a bit of a vibe shift when Jupiter gets into Leo at the end of June of 2026. But in the meantime, it's more internal, it's more emotional, it's more soul-searching, navel-gazing, choose your analogy, and it's also time to get into themes about vulnerability, trust, power, control, legacies, inheritances, and sometimes the things that we carry that are not ours. And so when Jupiter gets into Leo at the second half of the year, it's about really living the fruit of the internal work that you've been doing since June of 2025. But that said, Saturn, when you talk about Saturn, so Saturn left Pisces, your sign of home and family, where it was for 3 years, and this was on February 13th, it went into Aries. For you, Aries is something called your 5th sign. And so in general, when Saturn goes through the 5th, it sort of says to Sag rising, it's time to take yourself and take your talent seriously. Depending on the Sag rising, it can also ask the question, who are you? Saturn doesn't like, gray. It's a very black and white planet. Either you know who you are or you don't know who you are. Either you take yourself seriously or you don't take yourself seriously. It's kind of that simple. So Saturn is saying, if you are burnt out, Sagittarius rising, then what are the concrete steps you're going to take in order to bring back that spark? If you have not been taking yourself seriously, then how do you really prioritize your talents, your gifts, your abilities? Because at the end of the day, there's only one you. Even if you believe in reincarnation, there's only one you in the universe. So be you. There's only one you. Do not be a cover artist in your own life. For some Sag risings, this time is really the beginning of a major creative project if you are on the artistic side. If you are not artistic, it's to get back in touch with the things that just naturally you do that nobody else can do. For some Sag risings, this also is a time, I realize this is very specific and not for everybody, a time where children can come into your life. Namely, there could be a pregnancy. You're coming off of a larger period where it's about settling down, putting down roots. Some Sag risings got into major relationships, they got married, or major partnerships, and sometimes children can come out of that. Of course, that's not going to be for everybody. It's not it's kind of pulling away some of the heavier energy I think Sag rising was experiencing the past couple of years, and especially again when Jupiter gets into Leo, you're going to have Saturn in Aries. The eclipses are going to get out of your career area and your home area. It's just a different energy and vibe towards the second half of the year. Capricorn. So Saturn is your planet, and Saturn, as you know, since February 13th, has been in your 4th. It's saying, I know you're a Capricorn, but Saturn rules you, and Saturn is saying, Capricorn, your priority for the next 2 years, until April 13th of 2028. Yes, 2028 is your sign of home, family, roots, and foundation. Now, this means different things to different Capricorns, and certainly it means different things depending on what stage of life you are in. You could be younger, and so Saturn goes into the fourth, and you are really beginning to think about your life on more serious terms, and where do I want to live? Where do I want to build my life? And maybe sometimes getting into a serious relationship and starting that, moving in with somebody. And that can sometimes mean what Saturn the fourth is for you. But Saturn in general says to take, sort of ask the question, where is home and who is home? So again, it could be a move, but who is home? And so it is to redefine the concept of family. It is to, for some Capricorns, you need to focus on your parents. It could be a need to take care of them. They're getting older. I've seen sometimes when Saturn goes to the fourth, it's like some issue between a child and a parent really comes to the forefront, and it needs to be worked on. That's not going to be, of course, for every Capricorn rising. It could be a time when you really need to put the past in the past, because the fourth is what supports your life. It is the soil, it is the roots, and whatever is not allowing you to thrive perhaps needs to go, or it needs to be worked on, for example. But it's a major time to be a Capricorn, and I would say that there will be very predictable periods when whatever this new story is going to come more into focus. So the first is Saturn going into Aries. Actually, I'm going to go back to last year. Saturn going into Aries May 24th to September 1st of 2025. That was setting something up for you. It's sort of saying you are now in a new time of your life, but you're not quite there yet. Then Saturn got back into Aries February 13th. It is a new time for you. And then this week, that's why I'm talking about Saturn, we have the Sun-Saturn conjunction March 25th. It is a checkpoint with Saturn. And then we're going to get into April 9th. Mars is going to get into Aries. So it's going to activate this energy. The Mars-Saturn conjunction on April 19th. This is 2 days after the Aries new moon. So it's just really pushing a narrative that might, one of its sort of heat points or points where things are really getting more intense could be in that mid to late April, for example. But again, big time for you, and just always listen for Saturn, because Saturn is going to reveal and show what this new time in your life is about. Aquarius, so Saturn is your planet, and as you know, since February 13th, Saturn is in Aries. So Aries for you is something called your third. The third is the space of voice, communication, how you think and listen and learn. And so for the next 2 years, until April 2028, Saturn to some degree is saying to Aquarius, this is your priority. And now this can unfold in different ways. Now I know that Saturn is your planet, but Saturn still rules you. Saturn still points you into certain areas, and Saturn is saying, okay, maybe for the next 2 years you're taking classes. You're focusing on your education. It's not necessarily a degree type of education. It's more to really take your curiosity seriously. Because sometimes we really think we know, and Saturn the third is saying, but do you know? Like, maybe you actually need to go back to the source material and reread and get new ideas and new perspectives. For some Aquariuses, this time is about, you could be the teacher. You could be really taking your knowledge, your expertise, and actually putting it into some sort of classroom environment. For some Aquarius risings, it's about your voice. How do you speak? How do you communicate? How do you listen? Do you? And maybe needing to put the Saturn work in those things. Saturn sometimes in this space can talk about siblings. This is a space that, from a traditional astrology standpoint, talks about your relationship with your siblings. So maybe that is a priority for the next 2 years. And for some, it's also about the choices that you're making, because it is through the curiosity of the third that we can really open up to the power of choice. Now, with the power of the choice comes responsibilities, and maybe we're not always making the best choices, for example. So Saturn is saying to you, you need to take your choices seriously. And that means weighing your options, really listening for how perhaps your choices can go this way or the other. But it could mean that in the next couple of years there are significant choices that really set you up for a different path going forward. I said this for Capricorn, I'll say it for you. There's going to be certain points in the near future or the recent past that are really bringing this new time into focus. The first is Saturn going into Aries February 13th. There's also those eclipses. We had eclipses in Aquarius February 17th. Saturn Neptune conjunction February 20th. So that mid-February, just a lot of stuff going on in your astrology. And then we get to this week, the Sun and Saturn meet up March 25th. So look and listen for this week. What's beginning to come into view and focus? Then we get into April 9th. Mars is going to go into Aries and activate this energy. We'll get into April 17th, Aries new moon, and then the 19th, Mars Saturn conjunction. So these are points just to sort of write down, put on your calendar, put in the back of your mind, because it's going to begin to show you what this new time is about. Pisces. So Jupiter is your planet, and Jupiter, as you know, since last June of 2025 has been in Cancer. So for you, Cancer is a fellow water sign, and this is actually a period of your life that's coming to an end. Jupiter spends about a year in each of the 12 zodiac signs. So you have a personal arc of 12 years. Yes, 12 years. So last year it was Jupiter, between Cancer, Gemini. Before that, it was between Taurus, Gemini. So this year, Jupiter is going from Cancer to Leo. It'll go into Leo on June 30th. So right now, this is a time, and I know I've been saying this, but it's really the dominant theme at the moment, other than Saturn, which I'll get to, is it's time to get back to you. It's time to do the things that light you up and give you joy and give you passion. It could be a very creative time for Pisces rising. It could be just even like a bigger question about identity. Who are you? And needing to get back into alignment with the things that actually are positively nourishing for the self. It could be a very creative time if you are artistically inclined, for example. That's where the energy of your astrology is really primarily pointing to, but we can't lose sight of Saturn. So Saturn was in Pisces 2023, March 2023 till March of 2026, and it was a heavy time for Pisces. So one of the questions just to reflect on is, have things shifted? Have you felt a change with Saturn out of Pisces? Because it was really putting a lot of weight on your sign for the past few years. But now Saturn is something called your second sign: money, income, material stability, and security. Now this is the beginning of a 2-year transit, because Saturn won't leave your second until April of 2028. But have you noticed that there are more financial themes coming into your life? Or maybe it's not literally about the money you make or how you spend it, but more about the philosophy that's behind it. What do I need? What really is important? Is it stuff, or is it something that actually supports and nourishes my life? Maybe if you were raised a certain way, you're beginning to question, actually, I don't know if I value that anymore. Maybe I don't need that in order to feel fulfilled, for example, or to feel safe or feel stable, for example. For some Pisces, you're really examining your relationship with stability, with security. And maybe whether or not you self-sabotage that, or whether this is just the time in your life where you really need to put the energy to create more stability, more material stability and security in your life. But again, it could be about values, and it could even be about self-worth and value, because the more that you take yourself seriously, that will translate into other domains of your life. So the Sun and Saturn meeting up Wednesday the 25th, is like one of your big check-ins with Saturn. So this week might give you a lens or an insight to what this new period of your life is about. I would also look back around February 13th when Saturn went into Aries. I would even sort of put this on your calendar when Mars gets into Aries on April 9th, and then you'll have the Aries new moon on April 17th, and the Mars Saturn conjunction on April 19th. So Mid-April is also a period where this idea about money or income or self-worth and value or stability and security are going to come into the forefront. And so it's to listen for what this means for your own life. So that is your look at the astrology of this week. Again, my name is Katie Sweetman, and it is a new astrological year. So I wish you a happy new astrological year. And for those that are in the Northern Hemisphere like me, it's spring. Happy spring. But I know that we are all around the world, and some of you are even my Tuesday Club. I appreciate you. Thank you. You can follow me online at empoweringastrology.com. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Spotify, I'm on YouTube. You can book a consultation with me. I meant to say this earlier, but I am doing a spring special 10% off consultations until the code is until the end of the month, so March 30th, and the code is spring 26. And I hope we will speak soon. So if not, I will see you next week. And until then, take care. Bye-bye.